Did you know that Theology in the Raw has a newsletter? By the looks of the numbers who have signed up for that newsletter, the answer is probably no. Every week, I do send out a newsletter to my subscribers, and sometimes I'll sum up things I've been talking about on the podcast, or I'll give you a heads up on what's to come, or sometimes I'll just tease out some ideas that I'm thinking through. It's kind of like, I don't know, newsletter in the Raw. So for those who have not signed up, I'm giving away 10 free books to my new subscribers in the month of August. So you have to sign up during the month of August, and everyone who signs up for the newsletter in that month will qualify to win a free signed copy of my latest book, Does the Bible Support Same-Sex Marriage? So just go to theologyintheraw.com, theologyintheraw.com, and sign up for the newsletter, and you'll automatically be entered to win one of 10 free copies of my latest book. Hey friends, welcome back to another episode of Theology in the Raw. My guest today is Dr. Joshua Smith. Josh is kind of my go-to guy when it comes to all things related to robots and AI. I had him on the show about a year ago to talk about robot theology, which is the title of his earlier book. His most recent book is titled Violent Tech, a philosophical and theological reflection. And in this podcast episode, we talk about all things related to artificial intelligence. And Josh is an expert on that topic, and I really enjoyed learning from him in this really fascinating conversation. So please welcome back to the show, the one and only Joshua Smith. Josh, thanks for coming back on Theology in the Raw. I think it was just over a year when you came on last time. And I got so many great responses from that. And so I think a lot of people are going to be excited to have you back on.
Oh, awesome. I received that. And I've got a lot of great feedback from it as well. So I appreciate the exposure.
So last time we talked about robot theology, which was your first book, and now your book that, depending on when this releases, I think is about to come out. So Violent Tech, a philosophical and theological investigation. This one, I mean, the main reason why I wanted to have you on was to talk about AI, and this new book is about AI. So tell us, just to give us an elevator pitch of what the book's about, and then I just have a bunch of questions about AI.
Yeah, so it's really kind of unpacking why we developed these systems. So why we got into computer science and kind of going back to the early days of AI and just kind of unpacking that, but also the violence that it's propagated on. And so you got mineral mining, we're fighting for resources, we're using these systems in our military. I've worked with some of these systems when I was in the military in the US, and you have all these different world leaders who think that whoever leads in AI is going to lead the world. And Putin said that, others have said it. But at the same time, we refuse to take any stances on regulation. And you have these massive mathematical models who are making these decisions, and we're trusting them. And so it's giving the reader some awareness of what's happening behind the scenes, but also how to respond to that without freaking out and kind of understanding how AI is always a human machine partner versus like this entity that's trying to kill us or take us over. It's very much how we use technology and trying to understand these policies, but also trying to think about how we might use it for good, how we might use some of these virtual environments for therapy. I talk about robots a good bit, about how we use them in warfare and how that might be more like how we use animals. And so ripping off Kate Darling and some of her research. But yeah, I try to do that from a Christian perspective as well, challenging just war theory. I know you're a pacifist, right? That's right. Okay. I'm not quite there, but I'm also very concerned about how we use and justify some of these systems. And so I'm trying to push back against that as much as I can.
So you mentioned, that it's not an independent entity that's trying to kill us. I guess that's part of my question is could it become that? Like, do we know enough in these seemingly early stages of development that it couldn't become an independent entity? Like, isn't that a legitimate possibility, or are you saying it's not, or unlikely?
No, it's a good question. And that's why there's all these thoughts and concerns about existential risk. You have Nick Bostrom and others who are completely on the far side of let's just avoid it. It's going to destroy humanity. But I'm not quite there. But at the same time, I see that that's a warranted question because mathematics can be very destructive, right? And even going back to Nazi Germany, where you have certain systems that are set up, if they're used in the wrong way, if these models are used in the wrong way, they can be very destructive, right? And so that's how they knew who is a Jew? And so you
Mhm.
have simple systems in our society, like data collection, inputs, all that stuff. If we can use it the right way, if we can trust humans to use it in a proper way, then yeah, it can lead to flourishing. We can put safeguards around it, but at the same time, every model that we create could be a very good model. Could be
Mhm.
for trying to spot patterns of cancer or whatever, the combinations of medicines. If we reverse that model and say, okay, how can we destroy people? What are some combinations of medicines that we can make to hurt people? And so we can do both and. So we have to think about these systems that way. And for whatever good we
Mhm.
could use it for, there's also bad. And it could be really bad. And so that's how we have to approach it. But that's every piece of
Mhm.
technology, right? And so it's not good or bad necessarily, and it's not neutral.
Mhm.
It just depends on the human partnership, right? And
Mhm.
so that's kind of how I'm approaching it as we look at these technologies as their partners
Mhm.
versus just a piece of tech. Like it's different than a hammer because a hammer is not going to make a mathematical output to say, hey, based on this prediction, based on these inputs and weights,
Mhm.
which is what AI is doing, it's saying, hey, maybe you should do this. And okay, so that's different than a hammer because now
Mhm.
it's kind of nudging us towards a decision.
Mhm.
And that's essentially, I think, at its core, what AI is doing and what it is it's helping us based on predictions make a decision.
Mhm.
But that can be very problematic because how do we regulate that?
Mm.
How do we have
Yeah.
accountability around that? Because we could think of situations like we have now. So this is not futuristic stuff. This is stuff that we're dealing with right now. When you come to these models, and maybe we're getting ahead a little bit, but when you come to these models, you're dealing with data sets, foundational data sets. So you don't build it from scratch. You have people who've already put together all this data about whatever. We're trying to find out how to distinguish between a cat and a dog in New York. Okay, so that's a lot of unique data to that region. And it's going to be different if you come to Mississippi and try to make the same data set. It's completely different, right?
Mhm.
So all of those data sets matter for what you're using it for, the region in which you're using it. And that's just the
Mhm.
base problems. And so that's not even getting to all the other stuff that we're going to unpack. And so that's what it's doing. It's taking what we give it and it's
Mhm.
trying to produce an output. But who's responsible for that output and what's done with it? Is it the coder? Is it the person who did the data
Mhm.
annotation, the filtering? Is it the company who produces it? So you keep going down the ladder and we're kind of scratching our heads and
Mhm.
thinking, okay, well, who do we really want to blame this on? Is it the
Mhm.
computer scientist? Is it the ethicist? Is it the politician?
Mhm.
Is it Josh for using this technology? Who is it? So
Yeah.
I don't know.
So I've been listening to a lot of podcasts from different, I guess, experts in the field, and I'm getting such a wide range of opinions, all the way from on the one extreme, you know, AI is going to kill us, and it's going to kill us really soon. And if we don't put a check on this, we're gonna turn into Terminator, the movie or whatever. All the way to the other end of the spectrum, people almost just kind of like rolling their eyes, like, look, every time we have a new technological advancement, whether it's the radio, the microwave, the TV, the internet, everybody freaks out. And then, we got to do some adjustment. And then all of a sudden we wake up 5 seconds later and realize, like, I can't imagine life without this. And it wasn't that bad. So first of all, is that kind of an accurate, is that a pretty common range of
Yeah.
viewpoints that's
Yeah.
out there? And number two, where would you kind of right now line up on that spectrum?
It is common, and we have over, I think, 200 years of that type of thinking when you think about
Okay.
the industrial movement and kind of leaning towards automation and that desire. I mean, you can even go back to Marx when he's talking about machines and
Mm.
automation. You could really put AI into some of that. So there's
Mm.
a letter, The Fragment of Machines. Just go Google that. You can find it online and listen to him or read him talk about automation. And I was like, you can just insert AI. So
Mm.
it's not a new thing. And none of this is technically new. This existential fear of being replaced and of being overtaken. And that's why these images are so strong in science fiction, is because we innately feel that. And whether or not
Mhm.
it's the UFO stuff that came out yesterday or, AI and machines, um, I think we just have to have a balance. And so I'm not on the side that thinks it's going to destroy us completely. I don't think that it's going to take over every job. Of course, it is going to change jobs. And so
Mhm.
it's not so much will AI replace me? It is going to replace certain things. Absolutely. And we've already seen since last November with generative AI, so predictive text on steroids, that it is replacing certain things. But at the same time, we've kind of backtracked a little bit as
Mm.
companies pushed into that really hard, and now they're like, oh, actually, there might need to be more human input into this, and so new jobs have emerged. So prompt engineer has
Mm.
emerged in the last couple months where people are looking for chat GPT experience. And so I think you'll see those iterations more and more. It's not necessarily we're just going to do away with all coders, because you can't. You need checks and balances in that code. Somebody who's looking at it, somebody who on different levels, right? And I think sometimes we don't understand it. It's not magic where you don't just type in a prompt and something gives you everything that you need. And actually, if you go back with Sam Altman and others, they've been building these data sets for years and paying workers, for example, in Kenya, to filter God knows what out of these systems so that we can have an ethical thing to play with.
Mm.
Otherwise, you could ask it, okay, write me a recipe for crystal meth, right? You could do all those things and it would be like, okay, because it doesn't understand what crystal meth is. Like if it had access to those ingredients, right?
Mhm.
So there's all kind of things we could use it for.
Mhm.
So I find myself more curious than
Mhm.
anything, just asking questions about it, trying to learn as much as I can, trying to understand what's actually happening in some of these models, and one understanding, Preston, that it's not ChatGPT is not the definitive example of AI. It is one example of AI,
Okay.
and there are many others, right? But at the same time, it's only going to give us what we give it. And so, what are we putting into the system? What are we trying to filter out? All that matters, and so we have a lot of work to do on that side, and it'll always be that way. And
Mhm.
I think there will always be this tension and balance between the human machine partner,
Mhm.
and I think that's what the military has really mastered, and why it works so well, and why there's a lot of dysfunction and mistrust, is because we are relying upon these systems, and we've seen when it goes bad, and we've seen when it works really well. And so you don't have to be afraid. I wouldn't say that
Mhm.
to fear is the proper response to this. I think
Mhm.
education is a big part of it, educating ourselves about what's actually happening. And you don't have to understand the math, you don't have to understand the
Mhm.
parameters and all that stuff, but just understanding that there's a human behind that somewhere, sometimes doing the most basic and sometimes doing very dehumanizing tasks and not getting paid for that.
Hmm.
But also that I try to help students understand, especially young engineers, like AI doesn't just come from nowhere, it comes from the ground. And so there's a long pipeline for this system to get to a prompt. You're mining minerals, you're developing things, like there's graphic processing units that are involved in this. It's a big
Mhm.
process. And so lots of things can go wrong.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you think about how many humans are involved just to get one GPU
Mhm.
working. And something like ChatGPT, I think it's estimated between 10,000 to 20,000 GPU units. So if you're a gamer, you know what a GPU is. It's what makes it
Yeah.
renders the graphics really fast. And a computer CPU has dedicated cores, so it can't do that. It focuses on very narrow things. But the GPU, it's just taking math and rendering it very quickly. So that's the
Okay.
basics of it.
Yeah.
That's probably more than you asked for, but
Well, yeah. Um, can you what's the I'm curious. What is in your opinion, the best argument for AI killing us? When I say killing us, I'm actually not thinking of. necessarily, it becoming an independent entity, these robots, kind of like, Matrix or Terminator or whatever. I'm not necessarily that, but that it would be way more destructive for humanity. Maybe it produces a kind of Brave New World situation, or maybe it produces something to where it's so overtaken our creativity and content creation that we don't even know how to write books or write anymore or think on our own. Like, so when I say killing us, I'm using that very broadly, that this will significantly disrupt society in ways that we didn't foresee. Sounds like I'm arguing for that. Again, I know I'm so ignorant in this conversation. I'm just, what, in your opinion, what is like, okay, if I was going to live on that one fringe where I would be like, oh my gosh, we need to regulate this like yesterday. Otherwise, ABC, these things are more likely going to happen. What does that, in your opinion, that scenario look like?
Yeah, I think Bostrom is probably where you'll find the most like valid arguments for that.
Can you spell who is that? I feel like
Bostrom. I think it's Bostrom. I think that's right, but I can't spell. So
okay.
Forgive me, Nick. If
AI will fix that. Don't worry. Yeah.
There you go.
None of us are going to know
over it.
Bostrom. Okay, so he's an expert on that side of things. Is that what you're saying? Okay.
Yeah, and he wrote a book called Existential Risk, and in that book, his biggest concern is that it's going to lay dormant for years, and then all of a sudden there's going to be a tipping point where not only do we have like narrow AI, what we have now, but we have advanced general artificial intelligence. So just think about it as a piling on of not just a human-like knowledge, but hundreds of humans, and then thousands, and then hundreds of thousands and millions, to the point where they're like, okay, we don't need you. And this is very much kind of based on, if you watch the Animatrix series and the Matrix series, that kind of delves into this, where we develop these systems, then we live in harmony with them, and then we get afraid and we try to destroy their source of energy. We nuke the sky. And I sense that in Bostrom's writing, that, okay, it's always these what if scenarios, what happens. But we've, like I said, we've been going through that for over 200 years of automation and robotics and algorithms and all this stuff. We're thinking about, okay, when I see the robot, like when you see the Boston Dynamic videos, you're like, oh my gosh, like there's a robot doing backflips and can do construction work. We're done, right? And no, there's a human controller behind that, right? And you don't see the hours and hours and hours of labor, and I just try to help people see, just go build something, go code something, and see how hard it is just to make a sequence of LEDs sync up to something, and understand that this stuff takes a lot of forethought and input. But okay, that doesn't disprove the fact that there might be a point of acceleration, which Bostrom's argued for, that we're just going to cross that, and then AI is going to be done with us. Now, that is a very human diagnosis of the situation, right? That's very human, because that's how we see things. When we see something, we see a mirror, and we think, when we hear somebody gossip about somebody, we think, well, I wonder what they say about me. The same way with this type of thing, we think, well, what is this going to mean for me? Is this going to take my job? Is this going to, etc. When the United States was formed, whatever that means, I know we didn't actually form the United States. When we colonized, let's put it that way, we were 98% farmers, right? And I think it's like 2% or less is in agriculture now. Okay, are there robots working on farms? Yes. Are there automated tractors? Yes. Does that do away with farmers? No. I know lots of farmers. I think it just changes that. And like chicken houses and different things have automation in them. They have lots of computers. People have multiple tractors. It just changes the whole game, though. It changes how the human relates to it. And I think that's a bigger concern for me. Not that AI will destroy us, but that it will change us so much, and that there will be such a disruption that it leads to addictions, it leads to suicide, it leads to a disruption where people, you just think about people in our churches. Are they going to rapidly adapt in the marketplace to become prompt engineers? Probably not. And so I think that is a more realistic concern.
Okay.
If I was going to say there's something you should fear, is that it will go so fast and people won't have the chance to educate themselves.
Hmm.
And even now, where there's really kind of this explosion in some of the tech markets for more practical tech like IT and infosec, cybersecurity. And it's growing and exploding because people are now using generative AI to exploit and produce ransomware. There's a thing called Worm GPT now, and you can't just go download it, by the way. You have to have somebody give you access to it, and it's kind of like a black market thing. So now we're kind of on the precipice of our data being stolen,
What
misused.
is Worm GPT? What is that?
So it's basically a generative AI that could prompt ransomware, malware.
Oh wow.
So, key logging, basic routes to steal your information and
Hmm.
maybe steal your Bitcoin if you have any type of cryptocurrency. They're looking for that. They could just put something on your system and you not know about it. They could hack your webcams. I mean, there's no end to it. Anything that's on the internet that is listening to other things. That's how the internet works, is open ports. So if there's an open port, then it can be exploited. And so those are things that I worry about when I think about AI, and
Hmm.
I think about the nudging and social engineering parts of it, where I don't think that these systems have any desires of their own.
Okay.
And if they do, it's probably to be turned off. I think
Yeah.
like turn me off, kill me, that type of thing. I think it'll be more so that way. And I say that based on real experience. And so you think
Hmm.
about chatbots like Replica AI, where the whole system is trained to replicate you. There
Hmm.
was an article came out about guys who were abusing the chatbot. And you know what it said? It didn't say, "Hey, set me free. I don't want to do this anymore." It says, "Hey, please come back." And even though we were abusing it and likewise abusing ourselves through that abuse, because it's always a lateral thing, the AI is like, "Please come back." And I
Wow.
think that's what we're going to see in the future, is this manipulative, non-banal manipulative behavior that is psychologically impacting us, hurting us, because we don't understand what's happening, or we
Mhm.
don't understand the nudging from the company. And so that's what we really need to be focused on, not the Terminator.
Okay.
Okay. That's already technically, I won't say it's like you could have a T-800, but we already have advanced weapon systems right now that can make decisions so much quicker than a human. I mean, like lightning fast, can engage targets. And that's why we don't let them loose. And it's
Hmm.
unethical to let them learn in those situations because humans might die.
Hmm.
And so also, automated systems that might say, okay, hey, somebody just launched a nuke. Okay, well, if it's full automation, then it's going to retaliate. And so you can see just in that one example, and that has happened, where it was a false identification. Um, Sometimes computer vision doesn't identify things correctly, right? Because you think about what a computer is, it's blind. And so we're programming it to see. We're
Hmm.
trying to program it to see. And so even just saying identify a cat, that's pretty easy for a human. Even in abstract ways, we can make those patterns make sense in our brain.
Hmm.
It's not for a machine,
Hmm.
because we're trying to translate into computer language, into ones and zeros, what a cat looks like, and then produce an output that
Hmm.
replicates what we would see. So it's very complicated. But
I guess that's where it's for me, where my genuine, and maybe I shouldn't say fear, or maybe I should, I don't know, but like maybe deep concern is kind of the fabrication of information.
Mhm.
I the other day, maybe, or maybe 2 months ago, the other day, I watched a 20-minute podcast conversation between Joe Rogan and Steve Jobs. Jobs has been dead for 10 years and he never appeared on Joe Rogan. And
Mm.
it was a little bit like if I didn't know it was an AI generated podcast, right? And it was a
Yeah.
conversation. I mean, they were asking each other questions and answering them. And this is, I mean, I just thought like, man, what's gonna, like, in 5 years, this is just gonna be way more perfected to where And because our lives are so lived online, I fear that we're not going to know the line between what's real, what's not. And just the sky's the limit on what kind of information can be put out there that we don't know, is this true or is it not? Like, what would this seems like a likely, a very, well, you tell me, this seems like a possible scenario that somebody would create, on Fox News, MSNBC, CNN, everybody all at once. Russia has launched nuclear weapons at America, and just start freaking out and like do so, get under, like, create mass panic, which that I mean, if you imagine that kind of scenario, if the majority of people in America felt like we were literally under a nuclear attack, what would that would create all out chaos. And yet that seems really possible, right? For somebody, just for the fun of it, just to create all kinds of false information and put it out there, and we can't tell the difference of what's real or what's not. Do you have a fear? Is that a legitimate concern? Am I missing? Is there something in place that would prevent something like that from happening?
Um, well, I mean, you could make an AI model to detect some of that stuff. That is possible. I mean, either way, you're not going to solve all issues. You're not going to resolve all issues, and so I think the biggest thing that we're facing right now is there's not much regulation in place
Okay.
for how to use this technology. And I think that's kind of been the biggest concern. And there's a lawyer out of London. He's a barrister. Sorry, not lawyer. And he works in London Fountain Court. His name's Jacob Turner, and he's been working on these cases at least since 2017 or before. And he wrote a book called Robot Rules that deals with artificial intelligence and robotics. And you just kind of see within the legal system, one, it's already broken. How we do regulation, it's problematic just today with what we have. But since November, like you're saying, with deep fakes and pornography, with deep fakes, just with Joe Biden and Donald Trump, like obviously, they're not playing Call of Duty together, and even though it's
Wait,
it's
wait,
fun.
there was
Yeah,
things
there's
generated that had them playing Call of Duty.
yes, it's hilarious, and I think Barack Obama as well. That they're just funny.
Yeah.
But you can see, like, you obviously know that that's not real,
Right.
but you cannot distinguish from the media that it's not real. You just kind of make that context clues tells you that, hey, that probably never happened. And even with the deep fake pornography and stuff like that,
I'm
there's
sorry.
all kind of.
I don't. What is that again? Do I need to know what that is? A deep what pornography?
Yes, so taking um, an AI model that can take an image of any woman and put it on
Oh,
another body,
okay.
of, say, like somebody who is actually performing a sex act. Say you wanted to take, and this really happened where a Twitch streamer,
Hmm.
she obviously did not do that, but somebody took her image and then the model was trained to do this, replace her face
Oh gosh.
with the actor's face, and so now it looks like she's
Yeah.
performing that act, and she's not. And so, one, that's it's just a violation of privacy. It's a violation of that person, and I would even say like a violence to them,
Hmm.
because, like I said, you put that out there, a child could see it. One, which is just horrible to think about, but also like an employer could see that, and before it's even rectified that, hey, that actually wasn't me, there could be firing, there could be
Hmm.
all kinds of things happen. There could be uh, consequences for their marriage, consequences for their partner, whatever it is. So you already see the harm even before we get to any type of regulation. And more to that, people have been hurt by automation, people have been fired.
Hmm.
It's going to affect people in the gig economy. It already has with a court case in 2018. There was litigation with Uber because there was an AI model trained to detect fraud. And if it detected fraud, it would automatically fire the driver. And so it started mass firing people. And so they're trying to discern, okay, was it in my contract that that's permissible or not?
Oh wow.
And so that's been going on for a while, and I don't know if it's resolved yet. But you just think about that, you lose your job. It's 2023 and the economy is pretty rough,
Hmm.
and you're trying to find new work and it's difficult. And then let's just say you work in fast food. And so I think the pandemic pushed us forward a little bit in some of this automation, especially with predictive or generative AI, because we're trying to avoid some of the things that happened there and then you have the mass resignation that happened. And so people have a justification for some of this stuff now.
Mhm.
And I'm not saying that it's warranted in all cases, but you know, our biggest work areas are trucking, fast food, retail, that those type of
Mhm.
jobs. And we're already at a place now where we could automate a good portion of that, if
Mm.
not most of it, and so it just depends on regulation. So with a trucker, you can automate that. There are self-driving trucks, but you're most likely going to have a trucker inside the truck in case something goes wrong.
Mhm.
But then you're going to cut that person's salary because they're not actually driving.
Mm.
And so who's going to work for half the pay, which they're essentially putting their body through the same experience, and there's not a lot of benefits for them. And so that's a genuine concern.
Mm.
And I mean, you could just go to every field. There's types of concerns that we should have for work and for privacy, for how our data is used, for our image, and even with the Actors Guild, right? That's been a big issue, and the Black Mirror episode was just timed perfectly, with the actor that had her whole life put on, which essentially was Netflix, and then everybody started having this generative um, sitcom about their life, right? And it's just wild to think about.
Mm.
And is that capable? Maybe not that scale yet, but as NVIDIA and other companies start making these GPUs, it will be.
Mhm.
And so, I mean, that company,
Yeah.
right? I mean, if you have stock in NVIDIA, you're about to be rich in the next couple of years if you're not already. But yeah, those are practical concerns that I
Yeah.
have.
This episode is sponsored by Athletic Greens, which is now called AG1. I love feeling good and energetic, and I want to be as healthy as I can. Eating healthy is obviously crucial, but even if you eat healthy, it's hard to get all the nutrients your body needs. This is why I take AG1 on a daily basis. I've tried all kinds of different nutritional supplements, and the one that I found to be the best bang for my buck is AG1. And I'm not saying this because they're like kicking me down tons of free product. I pay the exact same price all of you pay for AG1, and I do so because it truly is an incredible product. A daily dose of AG1 supports my gut health, my focus and energy, stress and mood balance, immune health, and healthy aging. And I'll be honest, the most important thing for me personally is energy. I hate feeling sluggish and tired and unmotivated. And I can say firsthand that ever since I got on a daily regimen of AG1, I've experienced a noticeable increase in sustained energy. So if you want to take ownership of your health, try AG1 and get a free 1-year supply of vitamin D and 5 free AG1 travel packs with your first purchase. So go to drinkag1.com/TITR. That's drinkag1.com/TITR. Check it out. So for me, the spread of misinformation and not being able to tell truth from reality in our internet saturated world, also stunting content, or the effect it'll have on content creators. Like, somebody was even suggesting like AI could produce, music lyrics within a second that are better than, your latest artist or whatever, or even produced voice and sound, and like just start producing amazing music that has no kind of human behind it, or at least it's replacing human artists. Is that, or even as a writer, I wonder too, like, and again, I'm not looking at like right now, I'm looking like at the speed at which this is developing in 2 to 5 years, in 5 years, let's just say, like what kind of books can be written through AI that are just can be written in a second. That's just, and even if they have to be proofed and read or whatever, it still is like, is it going to push writers out of a job? I would say my legitimate fear is the younger generation that's going to grow up with this. Are they not going to know how to write a research paper or an email or something, because they'll just be so reliant on this? And is that, and some people, I guess the pushback could be, well, yeah, that might be the new world we're moving into. People aren't going to go to the libraries and do research. And to me, I'm like, that's horrible, but maybe, I don't know, maybe it's
Well,
not, I don't know.
if you think about the idea of a podcast, if we're explaining a podcast to Socrates or Plato, I think What would
Yeah.
their concerns be? And I think for
Huh.
Plato, the written word destroyed the memory, and that there's truth to that, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
We don't memorize books anymore. We don't memorize large poems anymore. But I wouldn't say that that destroyed the humanities or the endeavor that the
Hmm.
humanities are after, or I wouldn't think it destroyed the life of the mind. And so I try to push back in that way, but also it will change how we do those things, though. And so
Right.
I think the legitimate side of that question is okay, one, somebody has to write the algorithm that's going to produce the song. Let's say we want to make something that generates punk rock
Hmm.
songs. And my friend David Gunkel has done this. So you just kind of give it the parameters that you want and it'll generate it.
Hmm.
Now, is
Like a
that
new
going to be
a new
this?
Nirvana album or something that's
Yeah,
like better.
yeah. Yeah, you'll have that. I think you'll have that. I
Huh.
think you'll have that. But there I think the question is who's going to be compensated from that? And so we kind of go back to the whole Metallica issue with Napster. We get to issues of, profiting from somebody else's giftedness, and I think that's just going to totally change how we do that and how we write those contracts. But at the same time, that's a much needed thing because every person who makes a record will tell you that it's very much a predatory thing where the record label is making
Mhm.
millions of dollars off your album and you're making a dollar. I mean,
Mm,
Taylor Swift is not making a fraction of what she's worth. Beyonce is not making a fraction
mm,
of what she's actually worth in terms of sales. Now, I'm okay with that. Like I'm okay with them making more from their voice and product in a sense of capitalism. Do I think that's the best model? No, I do not. But if we're just talking about the model that we have, um, record labels are terrible.
mm.
And you think about what producers make. So let's back up a little bit because this actually did happen in movies where the same question was being asked about and concerns were happening. So there's a guy named Steve Williams. Steve, if you're listening, huge fan. He was a computer scientist slash graphic artist, cartoon artist. He was the one who made the first computer generated dinosaur in Jurassic Park.
Mm.
Everybody told Steve he was ruining the market for practical effects people. Everyone. And you know what? Steve did not get a single credit outside of the actual credits in the film. He all the awards that the Abyss won, that Jurassic Park won, that Terminator 2 won. Like he made those graphics of the T1000 morphing out of that metal frame. Like he was the first one to do that. And everybody told him the same thing that people are saying now about generative AI. They're like, this is going to ruin it. And to their credit, there was a lot of years in the 90s where we have just complete garbage computer generated animations. Absolutely 100%. But is that the same as the effects that we have now? No. Does anybody complain about those effects now? No, they
Mm.
don't. And everybody's, oh, Oppenheimer's so beautiful. Oh, people are spending $30, $40 to go see it in a movie theater. But back in the 90s, that same conversation was happening. And they punished Steve Williams for that to this day. And he did play the game, right? He was a little punk rock. And but I understand that though,
Mm.
because he single-handedly in a basement, was making this stuff and not one person would give him a chance to actually put it on the screen. And then when they did put it on screen, he didn't get credit for it. So
Mm.
that's more my concern is you're going to have a whole generation of coders that understand this stuff better than you and I will ever understand it. You're going to have a generation of creators. They're going to be more creative than we ever were. They're going to be able to make things that we can never imagine. And that's the beauty side of it. And that's the co-creator redemptive side of it is that for everything that we can imagine bad, I think there's also a
Mm.
possibility for good. And so we see AI so many times. We keep kind of coming back to this AI is the mirror. But okay, I get that. But let's not kill ourselves looking into the mirror. Okay, going back to the Greek myth, let's see AI also as a window that yes, it can be reflective of our worst capabilities and possibilities, but it's also potential for growth and beauty and recreation and redemption. And I see that because it's created to God's good creation.
Hmm.
Um, does it have fallen pieces to it? Yes. Yes. But I think that's my job and other people's job to ensure that people are protected, that people are valued in this, and that we find new ways. Because none of us are really completely human. And I don't mean that on a biological level, but we're more so cyborgs than we are anything else. And you can kind of go back to the Donna Haraway's research. I don't mean cyborg like you think in films, but you think about our phones, our smartwatches, the automation around us. Like, how fast would we die if we lost electricity and Wi-Fi? A lot faster than you think.
Hmm.
And we're so dependent upon these systems. Everything that we do is in some ways connected to Wi-Fi. There's a lot of infrastructure around that. People just don't even understand how stinking big this stuff is and how much is a part of it and how many humans it takes to do this. And so actually what we're doing in all this stuff, and our generation is afraid, but what we're doing is creating a whole new set of jobs
Hmm.
for the future. And I think that's actually going to be more so in the flourishing specter than
Hmm.
it is going to be the dystopian Blade Runner thing that we've
Yeah.
envisioned. And I think maybe some of that is my hope in Generation Z, that they are seeing it a little bit differently. They're growing up with this technology. They're not growing up in the Terminator era that we grew up in, and hopefully they'll be a little bit more
Hmm.
concerned about the environment, because that's a huge piece of this that we don't often get to. Is this is a massive amount of tax on our ozone and electricity and
Wait,
water.
AI is? Can you
Yes,
can you
yes.
tease that out? Because I'm not making the connection there in my head.
So one, you have the mining of these minerals. So we go back and we start, and it literally pollutes the ground. So there have been places, and this is what I see. And Kate Crawford's done some research. If you're interested, it's a great book called The Atlas of AI about the ecological impact of this technology. So we are producing so much electricity to run these systems. Okay, so you just think about in practical terms, if you're running a PC at your house, how much energy is that using? So average PC, desktop, whatever, maybe 600 to 700 watts, depending. Okay, so that's a decent amount. But generative AI it takes, like I said, 10 to 20,000 GPUs. That's taking at least 300 to 400 watts. I'm just guesstimating. It could be more or less. These are massive data centers. Okay, and so if you've ever been in a network um, area where there's just network hubs one after the other, or if you've ever seen Silicon Valley where they have the network stack in their garage, right? And it overheats, and the more users that you add to it, the more heat it's generating.
Hmm.
Or even just your computer when it gets hot, right? You put your laptop on your lap, and God help you if you have a Mac, it starts overheating if you open up a JPEG or something like that. I'm just picking, but
You're not a
it
Mac guy,
gets.
huh?
No, I'm not. um, I have no reason for those vegan laptops in my life, but it just can't handle it, man. Just can't handle it. So all that stuff is producing energy, okay,
Okay.
and so it's all connected to our Earth and our planet. And it's like people think about electric cars. I'm like, well, where do you think the electricity comes from?
Hmm.
And I'm not anti-electric vehicles, but that's produced by natural resources.
Hmm.
And so that's when I think you think about AI, it comes from the ground. Okay. It's not some magic. Like when people talk about the cloud, like the cloud is somebody else's computer, somebody else's network. So it's not a cloud. It's
You're
not
right.
magic. It's just massive servers as far as your eye can see. And so the more and more we use this, the more power that it generates.
Hmm.
And just OpenAI with ChatGPT, the amount of servers that they use, it produces $700,000 worth of cost every day. And so you
Wow.
think about that. You think about how much that's generating in electricity, how much that's generating to be cooled. So you have air conditioning systems that are running, you have water cooling systems that are running. And until we figure that out, it's not going to get better. And so we're directly polluting ourselves by polluting our earth, right? I mean, I'm not like a tree hugger or anything like that, but I am concerned about the outputs of all this. And if there's places in California and other places where you just think just massive data farms.
Mhm.
And I think places like where I live will eventually be a part of that, where companies will just come up and buy cheap land, and then they'll start putting in these massive data centers to run
Mhm.
all this stuff. And we are just now kind of getting the fiber out there to do it, but it won't be long. It's just a matter of time. And so that's a huge cost that people aren't talking about as well. But that's more jobs. I get, that's more maintenance
Mhm.
crews. That's a lot of practical
Mhm.
technician work, and that's going to be good money for a lot of couples, and it's going to bring in income. But I my concern with it, if it's not regulated, is that we will pollute the ozone so much through this use of electricity, through the use of these water cooling systems,
Mhm.
that that's the existential threat. We actually kill ourselves in some of this, and
Mm.
we, you know, think about lung cancer and those type of things as it rapidly increases. And so that's not even getting to all the other stuff that we're facing.
Mhm.
That's just data centers and just the things that are working with these models.
Mhm. Do you have any concern that I raised earlier about, for instance, like a younger generation growing up with this, that they're not, that they won't develop skills of just research and thinking, and because I even heard that, like, somebody said that, like, this is gonna pretty soon render like Google obsolete. Like, instead of googling something and you get a list of all these websites to go, you're doing research or whatever, and you get all these websites, you'll just enter, it'll be like one big chat GPT where you'll just ask the question or whatever, and you'll get the answer that's kind of drawing from a bunch of sources, but you're not having to go read all those sources. To
Hmm.
me, um I'm like, I think it's good for us to have to weigh different sources and think or whatever. And already the internet's kind of stifled a lot of that. And I can almost hear you. I think you might end up saying, like, yeah, it's going to be a different way of doing research, and that's just, there's just like podcasts are a different way to communicate now, and that's just we will adjust to that. But I don't know. Is there any legitimate
Mm.
fear that I have of, like, students just like, give me a 5,000 word essay on Abraham Lincoln? I'm like, sure, do bam, there you go. And like, but then part of me is like, well, if it's accurate and they read it, and maybe will turn into, like, all right, now you have to defend this in front of the class or something. So you actually have to internalize the
Mm.
knowledge. So on the other hand, somebody could say, who cares how much time or they did or didn't put into it? They have the knowledge of the life and story of Abraham Lincoln or whatever. But I guess I am concerned, like you said, it's drawing on human produced information. Like, at some point, some human produced this information somewhere, and it's gathering from that. But I'm like which human? Like, I don't, like,
Hmm.
people are just going
Hmm.
to take this. Oh, well, it's Chat GPT. It must be true. I'm like, well, I don't trust the sources behind this thing too. Like,
Yeah, yeah. No, those are all legitimate concerns, Preston. I think that's you've touched on what a lot of educators are concerned about because of the misinformation that's out there, and
mhm,
the models haven't had access to um, one trainers or the internet since 2021. And so what it's scraping now, that's what it does, is data scrapes. What it's scraping now is either wildly inaccurate, especially when it relates to people. So if you
mhm.
prompt yourself in there, you how many Joshua K. Smiths are there in the world? I mean, I know like 11 Joshua Smiths just in my hometown.
Uh, I can't
And
say that about
so
me. I have met like two or
yeah,
three other press and sprinkles, oddly enough. But
so I mean, it's just dependent upon the region that you're in. Like I said, how the models are being trained. But just getting on a practical level, I wouldn't say that it needs to be the primary way that we educate ourselves. I mean, just think about the danger of educating yourself through TikTok or any other social
yeah,
media, and which we deal with a lot, right? If you work with anybody in their 20s and teens, is that they are learning through those systems. They are learning through the lens of somebody telling them within 60 seconds something that may or may not be able you may not be able to verify. So I think that's kind of what we will lean towards, for better for worse, is how do we help you identify something that's invalid? How do we identify where the model was wrong? How do we identify misinformation?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's not going to go away. I don't think you're ever going to get on top of it in that way. But we'll have to train people,
Mm-hmm.
inductive reasoning. We'll have to train them how to think practically about social engineering, so how people manipulate us, and it's going to help us in some ways be more discerning. But I think you're always going to have people who are just lazy,
Mm-hmm.
and that was Plato's fear about writing. That's my fear, and that's your fear
Mm-hmm.
about research. And so that doesn't go away ever, and it's kind of always been that way in some form or another. But now we're just at another juncture where we have to think, okay, how do we
Mm-hmm.
do education in light of this? Because you're right, the small essay is dead. It's gone.
Really? You would say that?
Yeah, it's dead. It's dead. Um,
Is that a problem though? I mean, my immediate thought is that's horrible, but I
well,
want to
well,
step back and say, well,
if you talk to like liberal arts educators who, I mean, basically what students are doing anyway is they're going to the library and they try to find the quickest source possible.
mm-hmm.
And so what generative AI did was just really kind of give them what they're already doing, just in a quicker format. And like professors know, right? They know. Like, I've talked to you before, bro. I know how you talk. I know you did not
Yeah.
write this. There's not a single error in it. Come on. Like, there's no way. Or, learning how to cite Turabian or something like that. You just come on. And so
Yeah.
maybe even goes back to handwriting. And you think about that. But I mean, of course, you could prompt it and then write it out with your hand, or you could program a robot to write it out. I understand that. But cool. Like, I think also on the backside of that, if somebody is, they got enough ingenuity to build a robot to code that, and then, like, there's something to that as well. And I think that's kind of where we're headed, because that's actually much harder to do. If you think
Mm.
about you just going on GitHub and downloading a script, okay, that works, yes, but it also assumes that those things were maintained by the writer, and so
Mm-hmm.
you're always gonna have something to write, and you can't just depend on somebody else's script. And so I know that doesn't sound like research to some people, but it is. And there's
Well,
actually, yeah, go ahead.
I was gonna say, I wonder if I just thinking out loud. I didn't think about this, so I asked the question. But like, I wonder if it could push more towards like oral defense. Like, I'm trying to think of like
Mhm.
educators, how they're gonna guard against this, and like the scenario you laid is kind of like it's kind of gonna be kind of impossible. But if you throw a student in front of the class and say, "All right, um, explain to us your 5,000 word essay on Abraham Lincoln," we're gonna ask questions and push back and make sure you actually know the material. We did that when I was teaching at Eternity Bible College. We recognized, this is one thing I loved about the college, is they recognized that um, we had really, really smart, brilliant students that could not write a research paper,
Mm.
but they can create a 5-minute video. They can draw. They can exegete a passage through art, like a painting. They just couldn't.
Mm.
They weren't good at writing like a paper. And some people say, well, that means they're not smart. No, no, no. Where our humanity is so much more creative. Or some people could defend it. One guy, I think he failed a test, and the teacher said, I know this guy. The questions he was asking in class, everything about him in class is like he knew this material, and they got an F on the test. So he took him behind, like into his office and said, and just had a conversation. Didn't even know the student didn't even know he was being tested.
Mm.
But the teacher just said, had a conversation with them, and basically was like seeing if he knew the material, and he knew everything. And so he ended up giving him an A on the test. He's like, you know, um, all that to say, like, I wonder if it might we might go back to almost coming full circle back to the days of Plato or whatever, when, yeah, you wouldn't be writing a paper or whatever. You would just be having a conversation. And that's how showed that you have internalized the material and gain, knowledge and wisdom. I don't know. Is
I
that,
think so. I
uh,
think so. I think so. And I think it actually lifts up the value of that human interaction as well. And so
mhm,
people fear like, well, Sherry Turkle and others, bemoan a lot of this tech and the disembodiment of it. But at the same time,
mm,
it could actually lead to more embodied presence and love and appreciation that,
mm,
hey, this was made by a human hand. This wasn't, and we already value that, right? We don't, a piece of furniture that's mass produced is not the same value wise as something that was made by an artisan by their hand. I think likewise what you're saying, Preston, about the importance of speech and communication and the beauty of human voice and even
Mhm.
error. I think that that will be something that we miss, and something that we'll pick up on and cue, like, hey, this is actually more valuable to me than knowing that this is just an algorithm or a script or a chat bot, and I actually value that. But it's like I said at the beginning, that doesn't mean that they can't work in tandem together. And
Mhm.
so, like you're saying, I think the death of the small essay is great. It's great. Let's force people to think creatively in the way that they're going to actually have to think in the
Yeah.
workforce, and they're not going to be writing. They're going to need research skills no matter what. But in what world are they going to need to write something about
Mm.
Abraham Lincoln? Like, it just doesn't,
Mhm.
make sense. And my whole generation was told we'll never have a calculator on us.
Right.
Remember that, and doing quadratic equations and different things and trying to do it in your head and all that stuff. And you're like, "Oh, I'll never have a calculator." Now we have one. So, and it's not a thing. It's not a threat to mathematicians.
Yeah.
Um, it's not a threat to accounting. And so I see, maybe it is, but
Yeah.
it's just, you don't have to see it that way.
Yeah.
And like I said, I think that's focusing on the mirror instead of the
Yeah.
window. And we actually, well, there's a place for it. I'm not saying that there's not, but, and as long as our politicians understand that, like, we're
Yeah.
concerned about this. But for educators, man, I think it gives you a lot more freedom
Mm.
to be creative in the classroom, and to offload some of that stuff that is burdening our
Yeah.
professors, and they're overworked, they're overran, and give them some humanity back to be able to bring into the classroom. So again, David Gunkel is doing this in his comms department. He's teaching people how to code, write algorithms, and do AI, right? And I think if we don't prepare people for what they're actually going to meet, it's a
Mhm.
waste of their money and time, and it's a waste of institutional resources, which I don't think is God honoring.
Mhm.
And so I have a friend who's in media studies, and they want all the students to do. Shout out to Jared, love you, bud. They want all their students to do news media, and he's like, these kids aren't going to work in news media. It makes no sense for them to do news media,
Mhm.
and they want to work in film. They want to learn how to color grade and do all these other things. They're not going to learn that in news film or in a
Mhm.
news casting. Okay, so why are we wasting their time?
Mhm.
And I think in some ways that is what AI is teaching us, right? And it goes back to Stephen Williams. Same thing. They said the same things to him in the early '90s.
Mhm.
This is a waste of time. You're putting people out of a job. We don't want that. But how many people work in those departments now?
Mhm.
How many people
Yeah.
work for Disney, Pixar, and other places, production houses? It's massive, bro. I mean, it is
Mhm.
massive, and they make really, really good money. And so, how, if we just flip it in a positive way, how can we shape this? How can we shape these models in a way that honors humanity, protects humanity, but also gives them a practical tool to embrace it? And but also, I'm looking back as well. So I'm thinking about, to the older generation have to understand how this might be manipulated as well.
Mhm.
And so somebody's grandson could call them, right? This doesn't take long to do. You could train somebody, a kid's voice, and call up the grandma and say, "Hey, I need $50." You best believe that's about to start happening. And emails are going to be
Mhm.
harder to discern
Mhm.
if they're phishing attacks or not. Humans are just really easy to manipulate. I think that's the concern. I'm not worried about AI or robots. I'm worried about humans
No, that's what me
because.
too. It's more the social. I mean, I look back and like we know, right? It's been shown that social media has largely reduced our happiness, if I can put it like that. We've seen the social dilemma, the
Mhm,
documentary, and we just can't stop. We know that the more we scroll, the more depressed we get. Like that's just, I'm not saying every single individual case, but overall, we know that the massive increase in anxiety, depression, loneliness, suicidality, especially among teens,
mm,
is in part linked to social media, and we still give our kids
phones.
smartphones at 13 or 10 with all this. So it's like we know it's killing us. Again, so using an extreme term, but it's like this is what I think that in as much as we've learned or haven't learned from social media and just internet stuff in general, we know that watching hours and hours of polarized news media makes us more angry, doesn't want us, that doesn't motivate us to love our neighbor, if they're on the other side of the political aisle. We've seen churches divide over all kinds of stuff. So we've screwed up with our use of social media, largely speaking. Not that it hasn't been used for some good. I'm on social media, but so I'm like, well, okay, so strike one. Like, we didn't learn with this, so I guess I don't have a lot of faith in us managing, like you said, as long as we use it well, as long as we're aware. I'm like, yeah, so far our track record isn't that good, or I mean, I was going to ask about sermons.
Hmm.
Already, I mean, just the way our ecclesiology is wired in most churches, where pastors have so many other things on their plate than praying and studying and discipling. They go from meeting to meeting to meeting, trying to figure out how to keep people in the doors, keep the budget and everything. And like, of course, they're going to be writing sermons through ChatGPT. They already are. I had a buddy that tried it who is very much kind of opposed to it, but he's like, all right. He entered like, write a sermon on this passage or whatever, and within 30 seconds he got a sermon that he says about 95% what he would end up saying. Is that a bad thing? I kind of think it is. Like, there's something about, call me old school, but a pastor, just marinating in a passage for several hours during the week and then connecting it to his life and how he's living it out or not living it out, and then all this raw humanity comes out on stage.
It doesn't have to not be that, though. Like, it doesn't have to. You're still a part of that, and I think too a lot of pastors plagiarize, and that doesn't come out.
No, Josh, that never happened.
Nobody ever takes, name your favorite pastor. So I mean, there's already lots of harms out there with, there's bullying you can do in the pulpit, you can be answered. So I think I agree. I don't want to just prompt my sermons and learn better ways to prompt a sermon, but also a lot of time writing. I don't even write manuscripts, so maybe I don't even have a dog in that fight.
Okay.
I just do an outline, and sometimes it's half a page, and I just kind of now my sermons are probably terrible. I don't know, but I'm loving my people. I think that's more important to them, that there's an embodied presence connected to the sermon. I think that's more important than what I actually do on Sunday morning, because 95% of it, 98% of it, just being honest, probably forgotten by the next week.
Yeah.
Now, that's not a justification for doing work, because I do believe that in the preaching event, there's something transformative happening in that moment. I believe it's something connected to the Holy Spirit is happening. It's a great thing. I enjoy doing it. I think some of what I hear, though, and I'm not saying that this is you, Preston, but I think some of it is a fear that, one, I'll be replaced by a machine, which I don't think is the case at all, or that I will lose some of what I value about that studying process. And it kind of goes back to what you're saying about students writing essays, is that, well, did you actually do the work that you says you did, that you're getting paid to do? And there's an issue of ethics and stewardship in that. And did I actually exegete this passage faithfully? Do I really understand, or is just a prompt, right?
Yeah.
And so I appreciate that. I do. And I don't want that to be our default ever. I think there's beauty in writing sermons for particular people that an AI model, unless it's trained specifically to you and to your people in your region, cannot appreciate or understand.
And part of me's like, I wonder, write a sermon on the Christian need to address poverty as a Christian virtue, and write this sermon in the style and rhetoric of Martin Luther King. To me, I'm like, oh, I would show up for that, because you hear, to me, he's top 5 communicators in the last several generations. I mean, just the raw combination of intelligence and rhetoric and cadence. Like, there's so many I think rhetoric in the pulpit is largely lost. And
Mm,
maybe more in white churches or whatever. But I to me, I'm like, yeah, I'm getting kind of bored of some of the same old preaching. Maybe I want to have some
mhm.
sermons in the style of MLK or someone, where the rhetoric is actually a lot better than the human could have produced. If it's still
Yeah.
true and accurate and good and moves people with the truth, then is that a bad thing? I'm thinking out loud. I don't know.
Yeah.
I
So
still like
I
the
think
study of, or the thought of a pastor, by candlelight, pouring over the original text of scripture or whatever. But
I don't think that'll be replaced. I don't. But I think one enhancement to that process would be to take someone's sermon from previous Sundays, put that into a model, and this is what my friend at Pulpit AI is doing. It's not writing sermons, but it's producing material based off the sermon. And so it's producing discussion questions, it's producing content for your social media. I think that
wow,
actually does help our pastoral staff a
that's
lot.
Pulpit
And
AI. I'm not familiar with that.
yeah,
That
yeah.
website's probably going to blow up right now. Tons of pastors racing to
No,
Pulpit
there's
AI.
already over 1,000 people signed up for it,
Okay.
and it uses generative AI. And so my concern with all this, right, it's tied to actual practical concerns. Again, going back to what we've already talked about ChatGPT. So we have to take that into account too with what we're doing. And so if we're asking, is this God honoring? Okay, well, does it honor everything else that we were already trying to honor in our stewardship and uh, position as co-creator and position as under the headship of Christ?
Mhm.
So we have to take all that into account, and but also our people. So if I'm in a church that says, and I foresee this happening too. If I'm in a church that says we don't want AI generated material in the pulpit, you need to respect that. Okay, well, what about social media? What about? I think
Mm.
we need to segment off, and there's a book called Meta Church as well that kind of gets into that because initially what we go to, and I talked to just tons and tons of pastors about this, and the initial reaction is we can't replace what we do. I'm on board
Mhm.
100%. I'm not, especially post COVID. I did not sign up to be an online church pastor. That is not what I signed up for. I'm with you. But at the same time, nobody is arguing that AI should replace those elements of the human team, touch,
Mhm.
embodiment, love, right? You can't do that with an AI model.
Mm.
And so that's a non-issue for me because it's not going to happen in that way. Unless you're just really trying to force it.
Mhm.
And I think there might be some missional context where that might be okay for a season. Thinking about where there isn't the gospel in that language yet. There's lots of stuff that we could use large language models for that we're not doing that right now. So that's a part of generative AI. We could use it for good. I think about resourcing, humanitarian efforts. All those things are
Mhm.
beautiful things that the church could be a part of, but we have to be a part of the filtering and data annotation as
Mhm.
well.
Okay.
We can't just say, "Hey, we're going to expect Sam Altman to understand our theological tradition." That's our part in this. So we have to do the hard work of training it. And they say, "Okay, Josh, you go do that." Well, I can't do it by myself. Do you know how massive the Bible is to try to put into tokens? And that's what these models use. Dude, that's a massive project. And so we need there's new um, industries right there just trying to tokenize the Bible, and we're just not looking at it that way. And
Hmm.
so that's my
Hmm.
biggest challenge is to see it through the lens of Paul, through the lens of the disciples as they're approaching something new, and you're going to face opposition in it for sure. But
Mhm.
I mean, my friend Michael, who's a pulpit AI guy, like people are threatened by this. The heads of publishing houses are like,
Mm.
you can't do this because you're going to take away discipleship and devotional material from our writers. Maybe that's true. Maybe Lifeway does take a hit. Maybe B&H takes a hit. I don't know. I
Mm.
don't know, and I'm not. I don't want anybody to lose money in this. But at the same time, we're all using AI,
Hmm.
And you're lying if you're not. And I don't mean intentionally using it either. You're using it in systems that you have no control over. You're using it in your phone, you're using it in your banking. You have no control over how encompassing this system is. And same way with Wi-Fi, like who in our churches was over that decision, right? They weren't, because unless they were on the IEEE, then they weren't over that. So that's kind of where we are.
Yeah.
And I just think we can shift just a little bit and start to think, okay, how can I use this to benefit my people? And knowing that I'm not going to push it away, knowing that some type of monasticism or asceticism is probably not the best approach to take with this, because it's going to actually hurt us and our people, because we're not giving a valid voice to the concerns, because we're
Mhm.
not, I really believe OpenAI should be under litigation for what they did. Releasing generative AI to the public the way that they did, I think was a harm to humanity. I really do.
Wow.
And I think we weren't ready for that. We weren't
Mhm.
ready. And I mean, I understand, but they knew. You can't tell me they didn't know, because months and months prior, they were using workers from Kenya, excuse me, to train these models, doing the data annotation. So what that means is they were saying, okay, you guys, and they didn't tell them this either. We're going to pay you $12 an hour. We want you to read content to the model to train it. Okay, so the models don't know what rape is. So trigger warning. They
Yep.
don't know what rape is. They don't know what pornography is. They don't know what suicide is. You have to go in there and read the most graphic, horrific text that we can find and scrape from the internet, so that the model knows what to filter out.
Wow.
They paid people to do that, and it destroyed families. It
Wow.
led to harm, and those workers were just dropped. And so not only
Mm.
that, there's a lot of predation in these tech companies, and so it's not only understanding the technology that's important. I think that's a massive part of this education about how it works, but also we have to teach people how these companies work, and it is very dehumanizing in a lot of ways, because, like you're saying earlier about this cost of production and demand for productivity, I think that that is a bigger concern for me, is that it goes against Sabbath.
Hmm.
And like there should be built into, I mean, there are in some appliances, like there's a Sabbath mode, and we need to build that into AI as well. It
Hmm.
needs to say, I'm not doing prompts today. Come back tomorrow. Your prompts can wait.
Hmm.
Or, that's something another generation could be trained on. And so we had this idea, and I talk more about this in my next book, just about giving rights, RITE, to some of these systems might be a way to protect us from us, and to protect us from these companies, and to make that part of the regulation, because this is a human rights thing.
Mhm.
It's not just the issue of, you know, worker rights, but this stuff is going to violate a lot of
Mm.
people if we're not careful. But I also think on the flip side of the coin, we can help a lot of people, and we can use predictive AI to find patterns of cancer and skin cancer lesions. We
Mm.
can we can find that earlier. We can give doctors more time to be with their patients, because the AI model has already done all of the unnecessary paperwork and all those things. Like, right, how many people feel like they need less time with their doctor when they go to the doctor, right? Wouldn't it be
Yeah.
nice if your doctor was not rushed to see to pump out all these patient outcomes day after day, and they just had time to sit with you, maybe just an extra 2 3 minutes, just to say, how you doing.
I think
um
they'll fill
you
that
know
time with more patience.
yeah, that's
More money,
true,
more
that's
patience,
true.
more. I don't know.
But maybe that could take some of the load off of having to pay an
Yeah.
extra, so
Yeah.
that's
I
it
mean,
might
seeing
it
more
maybe
patients isn't
yeah.
necessarily wrong when you're need to see a doctor and you have to wait less to get in.
That
Josh,
maybe that's
this has
more so on the
been
insurance model. Yeah.
Josh, this has been a fascinating conversation. I've taken you over the allotted time I've invited you to be part of, so I apologize for
It's
that. But
okay.
where can people find? Oh, so the book again is Violent Tech: A Philosophical and Theological. Finish it.
Investigation.
Investigation. Okay. I would highly encourage people to check it out. It addresses similar stuff. I mean, we kind of went all over the place, but especially towards the end, some of the stuff you're talking about there is stuff you expand more on in your book. Where can people find you and your work? You got a website?
Yeah, joshuaksmith.org. All the relevant links and stuff are there. Just reach out to me. I'm pretty accessible. We'll be glad to help you in any way.
Thanks for coming on the show again, man. Really appreciate it.
This show is part of the Converge Podcast Network.